I was a nose before I was anything else, and I think that is why I survived when better people did not. You learn to trust the thing nobody else trusts. You learn that the air is always telling you something, even when the instruments say it is clean. And you learn to keep your mouth shut about it because saying it out loud makes the engineers look at you like you have lost your mind. My name is Reyes. I came up out of the Scent Labs on Savoy Station, which was not a warship and never pretended to be one. It was a refinery, the biggest in the Carver system, hung in a slow orbit around a dead gas giant where the company pulled raw volatiles out of the upper atmosphere and cracked them into the compounds that the inner worlds could not live without. We made the molecules that went into medicine and propellant, and yes, into perfume, because the same chemistry that keeps a man breathing in a pressure suit also makes a woman smell like spring on a planet she will never see. I worked the analysis floor. I could tell you what a sample was by breathing it. I had a license that said so, and a nose that earned the license. The man who ran the chem floor with me was Richard Jacks. You should know his name because everything that happened around him, and because by the end I owed him more than I have ever owed anyone. Richard was a formulator, a real one, the kind who could build a fragrance the way an old composer builds a symphony, top notes and heart and a long, quiet bass that stays with you for hours. He was soft. I do not mean weak. I mean he had not been hardened by anything yet, and on a frontier station that is a dangerous thing to be, because the frontier is patient, and it files you down whether you want it or not. He was engaged to Sarah Carver, whose family name was on the hull, and he loved her in that distracted way that brilliant men love, where you are the most important thing in the world to them right up until the moment a new idea walks in. There was a fourth name that mattered, though none of us knew it yet, and it was a man named Mintz, Oliver Mintz, who ran operations and who had the kind of ambition that does not build anything, only climbs. Remember him too. He was not a villain in those early days. I want to be fair to him because the dead deserve fairness even when they have not earned it, and because the thing that took him could have taken any of us if it had found the right crack. He was a man who was afraid all the time and hid it under paperwork and protocol, and a refinery runs on men like that, right up until the day fear becomes the wrong tool for the job. There was a fifth name, and I have been avoiding it, which is its own kind of cowardice. Yves Du Bois. He ran the fragrance division proper, the commercial side, a big, loud, generous man who wore too much of his own product and laughed at his own jokes and was, underneath all of it, the kindest person on the station. He took the new techs under his arm and fed them and made the place feel less like a machine and more like somewhere people lived. I mention him now so that later, when I tell you what the hide did with his face, you will understand the size of what we lost. The thing always went for the kind ones first. It had learned, somewhere in its long, patient existence, that kindness is the door people forget to lock. The world before was small and it was ours. I want you to understand that, because I have noticed that when people tell these stories they rush to the part where everything burns, and they forget to tell you that there was something worth burning. We had shift dinners in the galley with the lights too bright. We had a card game that ran for 3 years without ever properly ending. We had the smell of the station, which civilians always hated and which I loved, hot polymer and recycled water, and the faint sweet ghost of whatever batch was running on the floor below. We had Richard arguing with the requisitions clerk about reagent purity, every week, the same argument, both of them enjoying it. That was the world. That was what we had to lose, and we did not know we had it until it was gone. The inciting blow came out of the dark side of the gas giant, where our sensors were blind because the planet's own radiation washed everything out. We had always known that. It was a gap in our coverage that the company had decided was acceptable risk because nothing had ever come through it. Nothing ever does until the once that it does. They came in slow. That was the first wrong thing. Everything we feared in those days came in fast, raiders and pirates and the occasional desperate refugee hull that did not answer hails. These came drifting, a loose scatter of shapes that read on the long scan like debris, like a dead ship that had broken up somewhere and was only now wandering into our orbit. The watch officer logged it as wreckage. By the time anyone looked closer, the shapes had changed course, all of them at once, with the unhurried certainty of something that has all the time in the universe and knows exactly where it is going. We called them the Hide after the first night, and I will tell you where the name came from in a moment because it matters. But that first night we did not have a name. We had a docking ring that would not respond, and a maintenance crew of 4 who went out to see why, and a single transmission from one of them. A woman named Valerie who I had played cards with 100 times that I still hear when the station is quiet. She did not scream. That was the thing. She said, very calmly in a voice I knew, that she was fine, that everything was fine, that we should open the inner doors and let them help us. And the cadence of it was wrong. Valerie talked fast always, ran her words together. This was slow and warm and patient, and it was using her mouth, and it was not her. We did not open the doors. Richard was on the comm board that night, filling in, and he put his hand flat over the release before the watch officer could touch it, and he said no. Just that. No. I have thought about that moment more than any other in my life, because it was the first time I saw what he was under the softness, and because if he had been even a second slower, we would all have died in the first hour and you would never have heard any of this. Here is what the Hide was, as best we ever understood it, and we paid in blood for every piece of that understanding. It did not kill. That was what made it the worst thing I have ever encountered, worse than any honest weapon. A weapon kills you and you are gone, and the people who loved you grieve a clean death. The Hide did not want you dead. It wanted you. It went in through the soft tissue, through a wound or the eyes or the lungs if you breathed it, and it did not destroy the body. It rewrote it. It grew a second thing inside the architecture of a living person, a second consciousness, patient and predatory and utterly certain of its own right to exist, and that second thing wore the first one like a coat. It kept the memories. It kept the voice, mostly. It kept enough of the face that the people who loved you would hesitate, and in that hesitation it would take them too. We understood, eventually, that it was a single thing wearing many bodies. A hive, if you want the easy word, though hive is too clean. It was one we'll distribute it across every host it took, and every host it took made it smarter because it kept what they knew. Valerie's knowledge of our corridors. The maintenance crew's access codes. By the third day, it knew the station better than I did, because it had eaten people who had built her. And it was beautiful. I have to tell you that because if I leave it out, you will not understand why we kept losing. When it had finished with a host, the body it left behind was perfected. The aches gone. The posture straight. The eyes bright and certain. Valerie, who had walked with a limp from an old accident, came back to the docking camera walking like a dancer. Sarah saw a man from her old shift come back from a contaminated section glowing with health and confidence, 3 days younger, every flaw smoothed away, and she almost walked to him. The Hide understood something about us that we did not like to admit. It understood that we are tired, that we ache, that we would, some of us, in a weak hour, trade the struggle of being ourselves for the smooth certainty of being something better. It offered that. It offered to take the hard work of being human off your hands. That was the lure, and God help me, I felt the pull of it myself before the end. Mintz felt it more than any of us. I will get to that. The grind was 3 weeks long, and it took most of the people I loved. I am not going to walk you through all of it, because the truth is that loss after the first few stops being a story and becomes a kind of weather. Something you live inside and stop being able to describe. But I will tell you the shape of it, because the shape is where the lesson is. And I will tell you 3 of them by name, because the rest I have to carry as weather, but these 3 I can still carry as people, and a man owes that much to the people he could not save. The first was the requisitions clerk, the one Richard argued with every week about reagent purity. His name was Pete Walston, and he was young, and he thought the siege was an adventure for about a day and a half. He volunteered for a recovery run into a section we thought was clear, to pull breathing gear we needed, and the section was not clear. We got him back. That was the cruelty of it in those early days before we understood. We got him back, and he was fine. He was better than fine. He came through the lock walking easy and grinning and 3 years younger, and he told us a joke, one of Pete's jokes, word for word in Pete's voice. And Richard, who had not yet written the rule, hesitated. We all hesitated. It is the most natural thing in the world to hesitate when someone you know comes home. We lost 2 more people in the time it took us to understand that the thing in front of us was using Pete's grin as a lure, that the joke was bait, that the warmth was the weapon. We learned the rule that night, and we learned it on Pete, and Richard wrote it in his own hand afterward, and his hand was shaking. We sealed the station into sections. We learned to fight a thing that did not fear pain and did not bleed out and could not be reasoned with, because the part of it that could be reasoned with was exactly the part it used against you. We learned that you could not let a converted host talk, because the voice was a weapon, the warmth was a weapon, the memory of the person was the sharpest weapon it had. Richard wrote the rule we lived by, and it was the cruelest thing a soft man ever wrote. When it comes wearing a face you know, you do not wait to be sure. You act, and you carry the not being sure for the rest of your life. That rule killed at least 2 people who were probably still themselves. We never knew. That was the cost of the rule, and we paid it because the alternative was paying everything. The second was Du Bois. I told you to remember him. The hide took him on the 9th day in the commercial wing, and it did not waste him. It understood what it had. A big, loud, generous man that everyone trusted everyone. The man who fed the new techs and made the place feel like home. The hide wore him to the door of our safe section and stood there in the camera, warm and easy and whole, and it did not try to break in. It talked. For 6 hours it talked in Du Bois's voice, with Du Bois's memories, telling us things only Du Bois could know, the private kindnesses, the names of our families, the small griefs we had confessed to him over the years, because he was the kind of man you confess things to. It used every gift the man had ever given us, and it turned each one into a knife. 2 of our people opened that door. They could not bear it anymore, the voice of the kindest man they knew begging to be let in, and they could not believe such a voice could be a lie, and they opened the door, and that was the end of them and very nearly the end of us. I learned, watching Du Bois's face on that camera, the worst lesson of the war. The better the person had been, the worse the weapon they made. The hide did not corrupt what it took. It weaponized it intact. That is a different and far more terrible thing. The aliens looked unbeatable because they were patient in a way nothing human can sustain. We had to win every single hour. They only had to win once. We had to hold every door. They only had to find one that was open. We slept in shifts, and we lost people in their sleep, and we sealed the bodies behind bulkheads, and we did not have funerals because a funeral is a gathering and a gathering is a feast. We just kept working. That is the part nobody puts in the stories. The heroism was not a charge or a last stand. The heroism was getting up for the 400th shift when there was no reason left to believe it would matter, and doing the next small competent thing, and the next, with no audience and no hope. The third was a woman named Sarah Carver, and she was Richard's, and I have to tell it plainly or not at all. She did not get taken. I want that on the record because of all the people I could not save. She is the one I came closest to saving and the one whose loss I understand the least. Sarah held. She was tougher than any of us, tougher than Richard, the family name on the hull and a spine to match it. She ran the section seals for 2 weeks without breaking, made the hard calls, sealed doors on people she knew. And then she made one mistake, a single mistake, the kind any of us made 100 times and survived by luck. She went to verify a seal alone because we were short-handed, and the section was not as clear as the board said, and the board was wrong because the hide had learned by then to spoof the sensors, to show us clear air where it waited. She did not come back wearing a smile. She did not come back at all. We found the seal she had been checking welded shut from the inside, her doing, in the last clear minutes she had, locking herself and the thing that was taking her away from the rest of us. She did with a welding torch what Richard would later do with a door. She used the rule on herself before anyone had to use it on her. Richard was not there. He was 3 sections away keeping the reactor alive. He never saw her again, and he never spoke of it, and the only way I know how much it cost him is that he worked harder afterward, the way he always answered grief, by being worth the people he had lost. Richard changed in those weeks. The softness burned off him. But here is the strange part, the part I did not understand until much later. It did not make him hard. I have seen men go hard under pressure, seen the kindness cook out of them until there is nothing left but the will to survive. And I want to be clear that those men also die just slower, and they take the reasons for surviving down with them. Richard did not go that way. He stayed soft in the only way that mattered. He kept grieving. Every loss landed on him fully and he let it, and then he got up and did the next thing anyway. I used to think that grief was a luxury we could not afford. He taught me it was the fuel. The day you stop being able to mourn the people you lose is the day the Hyde has already won, because it has made you into the thing it is, something that uses people and feels nothing when they are used up. The turn began with a sample. Of course it did. We were chemists. A convert had gotten into the analysis floor before we sealed it and we put it down, and in the process we got something we had never had before: tissue. Living hide tissue, contained in a sealed unit, ours to study. Up to then we had only ever encountered the thing as a whole functioning host trying to kill us, which is a poor circumstance for science. Now Richard had it under glass, and the soft, distracted, brilliant man came back to life in front of me, because here at last was a problem he could formulate. We worked it for 9 days. We barely slept. Richard set up a clean bench in the corner of the analysis floor and we ran the tissue through every instrument we had, and for the first 6 days we learned nothing that helped, only things that frightened us. We learned how fast it could reorganize a cell. We learned that it could lie dormant, that a contaminated sample could read clean for hours and then bloom. We learned why the sensors had been failing us. The thing put out a chemical signature that mimicked clean air, an active camouflage, which meant my nose was worth more than the whole sensor grid, because a machine reads what it is told to read, and a nose reads what is there. Richard started routing the hardest calls through me on the strength of that. The thing nobody trusted became the thing the station ran on. And then on the 7th day we found it. The thing that the Hyde grew inside a host was not separate from the host. It was built out of the host, repurposed, the way a hermit crab builds itself out of a borrowed shell, except the shell was your own cells reorganized. The second consciousness ran on the same hardware as the first. And that meant Richard saw this before I did, saw it and went very still and very pale. That meant the first one might still be in there. Not dead, buried. Suppressed under the weight of the thing that had been grown on top of it. The Hyde did not delete the person. It evicted them and changed the locks. But eviction is not erasure. The person was still in the room. We had been killing them, all of them. Every face we knew, we had been putting down on Richard's rule. And now we were looking at evidence that some part of them might have been screaming behind their own eyes the whole time, trapped, watching their hands do murder. Pete, do boys. Maybe Valerie that first night, the calm, warm voice begging us to open the doors. Maybe the real Valerie had been somewhere underneath it, screaming at us not to. We would never know. That is a weight I have carried every day since, and I am not going to pretend to you that I have set it down. I watched that land on Richard. I watched it nearly break him. I watched him sit on the floor of the analysis bay with his back against a reagent cabinet and not move for the better part of an hour. And I left him alone because there are griefs a man has to go all the way down into before he can come back up, and rushing him would only have drowned him. And then I watched him get up. I watched him decide to do something about it instead of drowning in it, which is the difference between a good man and a man who merely feels things, and the frontier is full of the second kind and very short on the first. The chemistry of it I can give you simply, because the principle is simple even though the work nearly killed us. The Hyde overrode a host by flooding the body's signaling, suppressing the original neural patterns under a new dominant one. It was a chemical coup. And what Richard understood, because he had spent his whole life on exactly this kind of molecule, was that chemistry runs both directions. If you could flood the system back the other way, hard enough and fast enough, with a compound that suppressed the hide pattern and gave the buried original the strength to surface, you might be able to reverse the coup. Not cure it. We were never going to cure it. But you might, for a window, drag the human back to the surface and hold the monster down long enough for the person to come up for air. We built it on the analysis floor with reagents meant for fragrance. Top note, heart, base, the same architecture I had spent my career on, except this composition was meant to be breathed by a thing that was not entirely human anymore and call the human back up out of the dark. Richard called it the recall. We needed a delivery method that would reach the whole station at once, through the air handling, because the converts were everywhere by then, and we would only get one true attempt before the hide understood what we were doing and adapted. It adapted to everything, given time. Our entire war was a race against its learning. And then Mintz opened the door. I told you to remember him. Oliver Mintz, who ran operations, who had the ambition that only climbs, who hid his fear under paperwork and protocol. 3 weeks of siege had broken something in him that the rest of us had managed to hold together, and the hide found the crack the way it always did, not with force but with an offer. It came to him wearing the face of someone he had wronged. Early in the siege, Mintz had sealed a door 2 seconds too soon, with people still on the wrong side of it, to save himself, and he had logged it as unavoidable, and we had all known it was not. And we had said nothing because there is no point saying anything to a man who already knows. The hide knew it too, because it had eaten one of the people on the wrong side of that door. It came to him wearing that face, and it offered him absolution, and it offered him the smooth certainty, the end of the ache, the perfected version of himself that would never again be afraid, that would never again seal a door early because the perfect do not feel fear. And Mintz, who had spent the whole siege climbing over other people to stay alive, took the offer. He opened the inner doors to the converted section himself, with his own command codes, because he believed the thing that promised him he would not have to be afraid anymore. That is the lure laid bare. It did not promise him power. It promised him the end of fear, and a frightened man will trade almost anything for that, will trade the whole station, will trade everyone, for the promise that the fear will stop. He let it into the heart of the station 8 hours, before the recall was ready. What followed was the worst night of my life, and I will not give you all of it. I will give you the part that matters. We lost the analysis floor. We lost most of the crew that remained. And Richard, getting the recall compound to the central air handling because there was no one else left who understood the dispersal, was wounded, not killed. The hide did not kill. You understand by now what that means, wounded in a way that let it in. I was with him when it started. I watched it begin to take him, and I want you to understand what that was like because it is the center of everything. I watched the ache leave his face. I watched the exhaustion of 3 weeks smooth away. I watched the wound close. He looked at me with eyes that were getting brighter and more certain by the second, and he smiled. And it was Richard's smile, exactly Richard's smile. And a voice that was almost exactly Richard's voice told me that everything was fine, that I was tired, that I had carried so much, that I could put it down now, that we could open the doors and let it help us, all of us, that the war was a thing we had invented and we could simply stop. And it was the most tempting thing I have ever heard in my life. I am not ashamed to tell you that. I was so tired. The thing speaking with my friend's mouth knew exactly how tired I was because it had eaten people who knew me, and it offered me the one thing I wanted more than anything, which was to stop, to put it down, to not have to be Ray's anymore. Ray's who had sealed his friends behind bulkheads, Ray's who had a nose for the air and could smell the lie in the warm, slow voice and still, God help me, wanted to believe it. But I could smell the lie. That was the thing it had not counted on. It had Richard's voice and Richard's smile and Richard's memories, but it did not have Richard's chemistry, the real signature underneath, the smell of the actual living man, and my nose knew. My whole career, the thing nobody else trusted, the thing the engineers looked at me sideways for, it came down to that one moment. The air was telling me the truth. The man in front of me smelled like a perfect copy, and a copy is not the thing. So I did the hardest thing I have ever done. I did not open the doors. I dragged my dying friend's body to the air, handling myself, with the thing inside him talking the whole way, sweet and reasonable and patient, telling me to stop. And I loaded the recall and I triggered the dispersal across the whole station, into every breathing thing left aboard, host and human alike, including the one that was wearing Richard. I did not know if it would work. I want to be honest. We had tested it on tissue, never on a living conversion, never at scale. I triggered it on faith and on the smell of a lie, which is all I had. The station breathed it in. And for a window, Richard had told me it would be a window, minutes, no more. The chemistry ran the other way. All over the station, the buried one surfaced. I heard it on the open comm, voices I knew, coming up out of the dark for the first time in days or weeks, confused, terrified themselves. Some of them only had time to say a name. Pete Walston's voice came up on the comm, the boy who had thought it was an adventure, and he was crying. And he said he was sorry, over and over, sorry for the people his hands had killed while he watched from somewhere underneath. And I told him it was not his fault, and I do not know if he heard me before the window closed on him. Du Bois came up, the kind, loud man, and he did not waste his window on sorrow. He laughed. One last time, that big laugh, glad to be himself for a moment, even knowing it was the last moment. And then he told the people near him to run, to use the time he was buying, and he went toward the thing that was about to take him back down, and he held it. Some of them, the ones who understood what was happening and what little time they had, did the one thing the hide could never do, the thing that is the most human thing there is. They spent their window not on escape, not on a last embrace, but on the war. They surfaced, understood, and used their own bodies as weapons against the thing inside them, going to the airlocks, the reactor seals, the places where a single human will could break the hive's hold on the station, knowing they would not survive it and that the monster would surface again before help came. They paid. They volunteered to pay. They had been prisoners inside their own skulls, and they were given 2 minutes of freedom, and they spent every second of it fighting for the rest of us. I have never seen anything braver, and I never will, and there were no cameras on most of it, no record, no medals for them. Only the open comm and my ears, and the knowledge that I am alive because the lost ones, given one last breath of being themselves, chose to spend it on me. And Richard surfaced. I was holding him when he came up. The brightness went out of his eyes and the exhaustion came back, all 3 weeks of it, and the wound and the pain, and he was Richard again, the real signature. My nose knew it before my eyes did. He had maybe 2 minutes. He did not waste them on goodbye. He looked at the dispersal readout, and he saw what I had done, and the soft, brilliant, distracted man did the last formulation of his life out loud, fast, telling me how to stabilize the compound, how to make it last, how to turn a 2-minute window into a weapon that could hold the human up long enough to fight, because he understood, dying, that we had not won. We had only learned the move. He spent his last clear minutes teaching me how to do it again without him. Then he told me to seal his section. He told me the window was closing and he could feel it coming back up, the other thing, patient, certain, and that he would rather I sealed the door now while he was still himself than wait and have to put down something wearing his face. He used his own rule on himself, the rule he had written. He made me promise, and I promised, and I sealed the door with my friend on the other side of it while he was still Richard, while he could still hear me, and the last thing he said was not profound. It was just my name, Rays, the way he said it across a card table for 3 years. Just my name, glad it was me there at the end, and then the door was shut and I did not open it again. We held the station, what was left of us. The recall worked. Once Richard's last instructions let me stabilize it, and it turned the war from a thing we were losing into a thing we could fight, because now when the hide wore a face we knew, we did not have to kill the face. We could call the person up. We lost the ability to pretend it was clean. Every fight became a thing where you might be killing your friend or saving them, and you would not know which until it was over. That is a terrible way to fight a war. It is also the only honest one, and Richard gave it to us with the last clear minutes of his life. The relief ships came 11 days later. They found a station that had held, against a thing that should have eaten it in an hour, held by people who got up for the 400th shift with no reason to believe it would matter, held by a soft man who stayed soft in the only way that counts, held in the end by a chemist who trusted the one thing nobody else trusted, and would not open the door no matter how sweetly the lie asked him to. They gave us medals. I have mine in a drawer. I do not look at it. I went back to the scent labs eventually, on an inner world where the air is always clean and the instruments are always right, and nobody understands why I still breathe a room before I trust it. I formulate fragrances now. It is good work. It is Richard's work, and I do it the way he taught me, top note and heart and a long quiet bass that stays with you for hours. People ask me sometimes how we beat them, the hide, the thing that wore our faces and never died and only had to win once. They want the trick. They want the bigger gun. And I tell them the truth, which disappoints them, because the truth is not a weapon and it is not a trick. We did not beat them by being stronger. We were not stronger. We did not beat them by being smarter, though Richard was the smartest man I knew. We beat them because when the enemy put on the face of someone we loved and asked us to stop being ourselves, to put it down, to trade the ache of being human for the smooth certainty of being something better, we did the unreasonable thing. We refused. We stayed tired. We stayed grieving. We kept the ache, every one of us who lived and most of the ones who died, because the ache was the proof that there was still a person in the room, and a person is the one thing that thing could never grow on its own. It could copy everything about us except the part that hurts. I still smell him sometimes. Not a ghost, nothing like that. A note in the air, a bass note, the real signature under the copy, and my nose comes up out of habit, and for half a second I am at a card table on a station that is gone. Then it passes. I let it pass. I do not chase it. That is the whole of it. We held the door, and a good man taught me how to call the lost ones home, and the cost was every face I knew. If you are waiting for me to tell you it was worth it, I cannot. I can only tell you that he said my name at the end, glad it was me, and that I have spent every shift since being worth it, the next small competent thing and the next, with no audience and no hope, because that is what he taught me a person is. The air is clean here. I trust it now, most days.